Today, we'll talk about the UN General Assembly, a new Gaza deal, refugee camps, and a bunch of media lies like USAID, IDF recruitment, and the exodus from Gaza. And then we'll finish up with yesterday's Houthi UAV strike on Eilat. So let's start with the UN General Assembly and Palestinian recognition. The long-awaited UN General Assembly meeting has started, and with it came a handful of recognitions of Palestine by longtime allies of Israel, such as France, England, Canada, Portugal, Australia, Belgium, Luxembourg, Monaco, Andorra, Malta, and San Marino. If and how Israel responds is still up in the air. Netanyahu's speech at the UN is scheduled for Friday morning. There have been talks of closing the French and English consulates in Jerusalem, which primarily serve the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. Both the UK and France have warned Israel that retaliatory steps will have consequences. The most well-known part of the week-long convention is the row of world leaders who get a chance to speak to their colleagues and the rest of the world. Let's go over some of the leaders' speeches as it relates to Israel. UN Secretary General and longtime friend of arch-terrorist Yasser Arafat wrongly stated that the scale of death and destruction in Gaza is beyond any other conflict in my years as Secretary General. Even if we take the word of the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, it is still less than 10% of the death toll in Yemen's civil war, which is estimated to be at 600,000 and rising, or of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which the British Guardian puts at over 1 million this last June. In other words, once again, the anti-Semitic UN and its leader lies to harm Israel. But what else is new? French President Macron stupidly is insisting that recognizing Palestine is a defeat for Hamas. Hamas, of course, stated that the wave of recognitions of Palestine is a result of the Al-Aqsa flood, that is their name for the October 7th massacre. So yeah, sure, they're so defeated that they claim the prize. That is, recognition of Palestine is a direct result of their actions, their monstrous slaughter on October 7th. Good job, Macron. Mahmoud Abbas, that is the Palestinian Authority President Abu Mazen, who video called in since the US did not give him and his entourage entry visas, said that Hamas must hand over its weapons. Like that'll ever happen. The president of Indonesia, the most populous Muslim country, said that we must also recognize and guarantee the safety and security of Israel. Only then can we have real peace, and ended his speech with the Hebrew word shalom. Very interesting that this comes from the largest Muslim country in the world. Egypt's President Sisi repeated his call for a Palestinian country based on the 1967 borders and stressed that Israel will not achieve peace through use of force. Turkey's Erdoğan held up one of the photographs of Gazan children, which has been since proven to be faked in a Hamas film studio, claiming famine and genocide in Gaza. He then went on to claim that Israel is carrying out attacks on Syria, Iran, Yemen, and Lebanon, thereby threatening regional peace. This was the gist of many of the regional and international actors, basically calling Israel's actions genocide and apartheid and against peace and so on and so forth, and cheering on a Palestinian state. So, 11 countries recognized Palestine this week, which brings us to a total of 157 countries out of the current 193 countries. Will there be any difference or change now that the number has gone up from 146 to 157? I don't think so. Did you know that only 11 countries recognize Taiwan, an actual country? 157 countries recognize the virtual Disneyland they call Palestine, while only 11 recognize Taiwan, an actual country with an army and a flag and an anthem and history and so on. Just goes to show how little this idea of recognition really matters. Donald Trump's speech mainly attacked the UN for its failed efforts to end global conflict, attacked climate change, globalization, and open borders, especially in Europe. He warned of Iran's terrorist intentions, stating that they must not have nuclear weapons, and called for the immediate release of hostages in Gaza. He also condemned the wave of recognition of Palestine, calling it a prize for Hamas, and that the Palestinian Authority statehood should be achieved through negotiations and not one-sided moves. Now, before we move on, I'd like to ask all of you to like, subscribe, share, comment below. Just do all the stuff that help us and take very little work from you. Moving on, there's a new Gaza deal in the works. Supposedly, Donald Trump met with the leaders of many of the regional players, such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, and so on. And according to a very questionable and often wrong leftist Israeli reporter, Barak Ravid, after the meeting, he released the following points for his plan to end the war in Gaza. This plan includes the release of all the hostages, something Hamas will reject for sure, a ceasefire, a gradual Israeli withdrawal, and a day-after plan without Hamas, with Arab financing and Arab soldiers. The Arab leaders demanded an increase in humanitarian aid to Gaza and a promise that Israel will not conquer Gaza and not annex parts of Gaza or the West Bank, or allow settlements in Gaza or the West Banks. Now, frankly, Barak Ravid has been wrong more often than right, and in general, left media has, for the last year, been wrong about Donald Trump and Israel regarding the souring of relations, or Trump being tired of Netanyahu, and so on and so forth, even when it was the entire opposite of what we saw with our own eyes via the U.S. administration, like from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, or the U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, or spokesperson of White House Levitt, and even Trump himself on video. But the media, with its own agenda full of lies, doesn't stop to consider they must continue to brainwash full speed ahead. So I'm not concerned with this. Additionally, the supposed demand for the release of all hostages mean that this will never happen, as Hamas will never agree to it. Let's move on to the Gaza City exodus. Speaking of Gaza, let's take a moment to talk about the exodus from Gaza City. So far, IDF estimates that over 700,000 residents have left Gaza City for more secure locations. And this, once again, shows us how the left media in Israel, be it the political left or the academia or the mass media, pushes their agenda of brainwashing and weakening Israel and its current government. In August, many reports came out. For example, the Times of Israel reported just this month, that was in August, this is even in September, that the military advocate general, the highest legal figure in the army, was opposed to the displacement of Gaza City residents, and that it was not possible to have the preparations in place for the evacuation of Gaza City. Or Haaretz, that reported that former security chiefs, analysis, and interviews warned that the campaign to displace Gaza City residents lacked a viable political or military strategy. Nevertheless, the bottom line is that the media was wrong, and it was pushing against this move. But, lo and behold, it is happening. As we watch, over 700,000 have already left Gaza City, leaving less than 30% of the original, which is likely an overinflated estimate anyways, because there probably never were 1 million Gazans in Gaza City. But anyways, let's talk about the West Bank refugee camps. The Lebanese paper Al-Akhbar reported that the U.S. passed along to the Palestinian Authority its 6 demands for improving the situation with the refugee camps in the West Bank. Now, before we go into it, let's take a moment to talk about the refugee camps we hear so much about. and what has happened there in the past 2 years. The Palestinian refugee camps are cities called refugee camps to perpetuate the lives of the Arab refugees with very dense buildings. There's no tents, it's not a camp, it is a city. Now, in theory, it's temporary, even after 70 years. They have city councils, they have mayors, and so on. The difference between a resident of a refugee camp, city, and a regular city like Jericho or Ramallah is that the camp dweller is lower socioeconomically. The camps, the refugee camps, are basically poor cities. But both residents of the refugee camps, and which are cities, and the residents of Jericho and Ramallah and Hebron and so on, are almost all classified as refugees. And that being said, the refugee camps are in fact a sham. And once again, one of the world's lies to keep the Palestinians, as they're called, as refugees to be weaponized against Israel. One main difference, though, is that UNRWA, UNRWA, has been responsible for helping to run the refugee camps. Now, in the past 2 years, the IDF has done some serious work in the West Bank refugee camps with intense operations to detain Hamas forces as well as infrastructure work to enlarge the roads, which required demolishing some buildings, and secure accessibility and security improvements. Obviously, for the residents, it's been challenging to have the IDF bulldozers tear through the camp, and to have family members who are terrorists or with links to terrorists being detained. So, as we said, according to the Al-Akhbar paper, the U.S. passed along Israel's demands for rebuilding of the camps from the damage of the last 2 years. Supposedly, this information was already passed on to the Palestinian Authority at the beginning of this year, and it's a jointly developed U.S.-Israeli project. So here are the 6 points. 1. There needs to be trust building between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. 2. The Palestinian Authority will start rebuilding the camps, including roads and sewers, with the Palestinian Authority armed guards protecting the work, but under the guidance of the IDF. 3. Palestinian Authority agreement to the current situation in the camps regarding the roads and the changes that were made for security concerns that the IDF has done, even though it was done with the demolition of houses. 4. The complete removal of UNRWA, UNRWA. It will have no role in the rebuilding process. 5. Founding a security center in each camp that will replace the local police, and it will include all the security apparatuses, and it will be charged with arresting terrorists. And 6. A Palestinian Authority commitment to rebuild or find alternative housing for 50% of the residents of the camp outside the camp, with a prohibition on dense building. Now, based on this report, 20 to 30 million euros have been designated to fund this project by the European Union. Let's move on. US aid, USAID. I try to avoid international stories unless they relate to Israel, so I haven't said much about the USAID being disbanded and investigated. But I saw a recent report that is an ongoing story that very much relates to Israel. Congress sent out two new letters to left liberal NGOs that have received funds from USAID to fund protests against Netanyahu and against the judicial reforms. The letters came due to the opinion that USAID-funded protests are against a democratically elected ally of the United States could be seen as a felony in the U.S. Obviously, with my own right-leaning bias and being very strongly in favor of the judicial reform that are desperately needed to save Israel's democracy from the situation it's currently in, that is, that the judges are not elected but rather appoint themselves and can veto any parliament law or any government act, with the additional problems of the bureaucratic, judicial, media, academia alliance against the people. This story of a left-leaning administration in the United States, that is the Biden-Harris administration, using its resources via U.S. aid to try to overthrow a democratically elected conservative government in an allied country is very concerning. But expect none of this to show up in your local media. Along with other media lies, I just want to point out that in July and August, Israeli left-wing media, which I criticize here often, reported on plans to recruit hundreds of thousands of IDF reservists. One might wonder what motivated such false reports. For example, maybe they want the public in Israel to protest against the government or raise support for ending the war in Gaza, considering the fear-mongering they were doing, so they'd be willing to accept even a loss as an end to the war instead of continuing with this just war. So let's go over a few of these reports. In early to mid-August, Channel 11, Kan, reported that 430,000 troops were authorized to be called up. I-24 News stated on August 10th that over 400,000 reservists were being called to the IDF. Now these are lies. The truth is that the current numbers are in the 70,000 range. But don't let the truth confuse you. Let's all call it the end of the world. I personally know people who've swallowed the lies of the left and were very mad at Netanyahu's plan to bankrupt Israel with call-ups of nearly 500,000 reservists. And let us just finish with one final report. Yesterday, a Houthi unmanned aerial vehicle coming from Yemen hit the club hotel in Eilat, a hotel which I stayed at less than a year ago. With 20 wounded, 2 of them seriously, one might ask how this UAV, this drone, got through, how it got through Israel's missile defense systems. So, the IDF stated that the drone flight path was very high altitude and as such was missed by the early warning resources, and planes didn't have time to reach it. There were 2 Iron Dome attempts to shoot it down that failed. And even though there was a 40-second window for the air raid sirens, which should have been enough time for people in Eilat to enter a shelter, as their expected time for reaction is 30 seconds, based on the amount of phone camera footage of the attack, it seemed that many chose not to enter a shelter. And the army wants to stress the importance of getting to safe spaces. And I don't mean the LGBT safe spaces. I mean real ones, shelters. And the IDF is investigating how the drone got so close without raising alarms. Our dear peace partners in the Jordanian city of Aqaba were filmed rejoicing at the impact of the drone in Eilat. Wonderful people, those Jordanians. True partners in peace. That's it for now. Thank you so much. We're going to stay tuned for what happened in the UN and tomorrow with Netanyahu's speech and so on and so forth. And once again, I want to thank all of you for tuning in, for supporting Netivyah, for blessing Israel, and keep praying for protection for the soldiers, the hostages, and the Israeli government. God bless you all, and shalom.